Welcome to Tales of Old Tombstone, stories, lore, and legend from the town Too Tough to Die, brought to you by the Tombstone Monument Ranch in Tombstone, Arizona, part of the True Ranch Collection. Program begins right now.
To the town of our free rode a stranger one fine day. Hardly spoke to folks around him, didn't have too much to say. No one dared to ask his business, no one dared to make a slip. The stranger there among them had a big iron on his hip, big iron on his hip.
Welcome to Tales of Old Tombstone. This is Stuart Rosebrook with Bob Boze Bell. We're broadcasting from Tombstone Monument Ranch, a true ranch property in Tombstone, Arizona, one of the most historic, Wild West and wicked towns of the Old West, the town Too Tough to Die. Today, I'm going to be talking to Bob Boze Bell about outlaws, bushwhackers, train robbers, those legendary men and women of the Old West who we're still talking about today and who many of their stories are still unsolved. Where is their loot? How did they do it? And why do we love them so much? Good morning, Bob.
Hey, good morning. You just described my entire life purpose there in one sentence. Thank you.
So Bob, tell me, when did you start worshiping the Old West, cowboys, outlaws, and all those bad men and bad women in between?
Well, I would take umbrage with one word, worshiping. I think that's a little strong because I do come to the subject with a little gravitas from my family. My grandmother was from a ranching family down by Rodeo, New Mexico, right on the border there. And what really got me interested at the beginning is how she told me that Wyatt Earp was the big jerk. And that was so incredible to me that I thought I got to find out what really happened. So I kind of come to the story maybe on the fence, certainly leaning towards the cowboy side of the story. But what's so incredible to me is that as I really got into this, you can trace all the outlaws and cowboys that created all the Western phenomena in the 1950s and 60s on television and movies back to the Missouri Bushwhackers in Missouri during the Civil War. Now that is incredible.
So I just read a recent book that, or a blurb about a book that describes the James brothers as military-trained outlaws or gangsters. Let's talk a little bit about what happened in Missouri and their influence on the post-Civil War West when all of these historic and legendary train robberies and outlaws were roaming the Old West.
Yes, if you want to distill it down to a very small concept, basically during the Civil War, a whole bunch of farm kids, and they were just farm kids really predominantly, became militarized and in guerrilla warfare, the James brothers being the main ones. And they were trained by these really outrageous guerrillas. Bloody Bill Anderson comes to mind, Quantrill. And they learned all of these bloody tactics of war that were way beyond their age. Jesse James was like 15 when he started, and his older brother was like 17 max. And so they were exposed to this pretty outrageous behavior, and they were just kids. So they applied a lot of these guerrilla tactics as a teenager would do. In other words, they would ambush first of all, they wore Yankee uniforms a lot so that they would surprise civilians and military groups by wearing the outfits of the opposite side. Now, never mind that. What do you do when you meet a Confederate unit out there? That isn't explained, but it's very, very brutal what they did. They were just kids, so when they would at the end of a battle or whatever, they would cut the heads off and put them on other heads and laugh about it. This is one tiny example. I won't get too graphic, but that became known as the Bushwhackers War. They were known as Bushwhackers, and they wore that name proudly.
Now, was this going on both sides between Kansas and Missouri? Was it the Jayhawkers versus the Redlegs? And does that carry over into Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, Kansas? Do those rivalries go west and are fought out in the streets in small towns and back roads of Texas, post-war Texas, and the territories out west?
Well, yes, with a slight clarification, and that is, of course, the Redlegs in Kansas and stuff were as brutal. But what makes the Missouri Bushwhackers so exceptional is that they were so young and impressionable, and it might have ended up being, well, I believe that they would have ended up to be like my grandfather, a farmer that was, solid citizen, and the war changed all that. But what is interesting to us as historians is how they created the model that was after the war went west. And that's where you end up in Tombstone with the Cowboys. And most of those guys were from Texas and eastward. And they were all driven out of those areas, and they kept going west until they landed in the bootheel of New Mexico and then came across into Tombstone. And that was the situation that created the big showdown at the OK Corral.
And so right after the war, there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of diaspora of people. I think we know the McClarys are from Iowa. The Earps spent a lot of time in Iowa and Illinois before coming west. And Wild Bill Hickok is from Illinois before coming west. I think even Buffalo Bill is from Iowa. Are the Clantons, were they from Iowa as well, or Missouri? Are they Midwesterners?
Well, now you caught me with my pants down here. I can't remember where exactly the Clantons are from, but let me say this. Wild Bill Hickok has his first gunfight in Springfield, Missouri. So it's no accident that Missouri becomes the epicenter of what becomes the outlaw of our dream, the outlaw that we celebrate in celluloid and in print, and in the magazine True West is prime of all the things that happened in Missouri.
So let's make the leap here. It's after the Civil War, and we're all trails are leading to Tombstone in terms of the big conflict between the Earps and the Clantons. How do the Earps regroup after the war, and where is the opportunity? What's taking these men west to find opportunity on either side of the law? What's happening in Texas and Kansas that's bringing people west?
Well, what fascinates me is how in Tombstone, you basically, Big Nose Kate, she summed it up. She said, it's foolish to think that country gunmen can go up against city gunmen. And what she was really saying was, these guys were rural guys, the Clantons, the McClarys, and yes, the McClarys are from Iowa, as was Earp. But you get this showdown between the two values of city versus country, and that is endlessly fascinating to me of what happens there. And I think that there's also a very strong case that all these people were coming west. It's ironic that they're called boomers. Wyatt Earp was a consummate boomer, and he never stopped in Tombstone that long. He ended up, in Seattle. He went to Idaho, was accused of claim jumping, ended up in Alaska, and he was a boomer his whole life, following the boom towns. And that could be true of everybody in that story in Tombstone.
Well, I just looked up, and it's an interesting fact that the Clanton family is from Missouri. Ike Clanton himself was from Callaway County, Missouri. And so it's interesting that we have this clash that happens in Cochise County, in the Arizona Territory, between the Earps and the Clantons, the Cowboys versus the Earps and Doc Holliday, in that fact that the Earps are from Illinois and Iowa. They're northern. They're Republicans. They first come to Kansas, and as they move west as a family from Kansas and out to Arizona territory, and then you have the movement of the Clantons and the McClarys south. It's interesting, the Clantons, they go south to Texas and then work their way out to Arizona. Now we're going to take a short break here and thank our sponsors, the Tombstone Monument Ranch. We're going to come back and talk about how the Clantons and the rustlers and the gang members became so powerful, known as the Cowboys, down in Cochise County in the 1870s and 1880s.
Well, thank you, Bob. Thank you, Stuart. And it's always fun to hear, the rest of the story, or perhaps the story behind the stories. And that's a lot of what we like to do. So we're glad that you joined us, and we want to recommend you. That's right, we want to recommend you to the very experience that we have. Going to the Tombstone Monument Ranch is not just an ordinary guest ranch. It is truly a real ranch, doing real things with a real history behind it. And it is a unique experience. You will also discover that there are a variety of rather original characters who kind of hang around and serve you well, along with, of course, the usual fine crew of cowboys and cowgirls who will make this a very delightful experience. Believe me, my name is Stan, and I've had the experience myself, and it was first rate. So, think about that as you're making plans for perhaps a vacation, a time that this year will be just a little bit different for you and your family. Go to tombstonemonumentranch.com, tombstonemonumentranch.com, and find a way to make sure you are here to enjoy a unique, wonderful Tombstone experience. And now, back to the program.
We're back on Tales of Old Tombstone with Bob Boze Bell, and we're talking about Outlaws, Cowboys, the Earps, and the Clantons, and that fine line between being a man with a badge and a man with a price on his head. So let's talk about how the Cowboys moved from Missouri through Texas down to Arizona instead of being drovers on the great trail drives to Kansas, which of course is where the Earps ended up for a while, working in the law business. Bob, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, they're interrelated, and I think a lot of the cowboys that ended up in Cochise County, some of them undoubtedly were on the cattle drives up into Kansas. And of course, that's where the Earps were. And I like to say, or there's a great saying that says there's a fine line between catching an outlaw and becoming one. And if you've ever studied the Earp story at all, you know that he was right there on that line. And in fact, was arrested for horse stealing and, it did time, it was in jail more than once. Same with his brothers. So they wrote both sides of the law. And, sometimes it takes an outlaw to catch an outlaw, which is what happened in Tombstone. So you have people who are much more alike than they're dissimilar. That's what's so fascinating to me. And you take all these stories about the cattle drives and the bushwhackers in the Civil War and all the migration that's coming out of Texas. Well, in fact, if you look at a map of Texas from the 1870s, there's all these red checkered dots or red checkered squares that are moving across the state. And there's somewhere west of Austin, somewhere in there in the hills, of Texas. And the rest is being settled. But as they do this, every time they settle a county, they push out 3 or 4 bad guys. And these guys keep going west, and they come across Dead Horse Crossing into New Mexico. And as a matter of fact, in the Tombstone story, Curly Bill is in the Galeyville, the outlaw town, and someone calls him, you're just another Lincoln County SOB. And Lincoln County, referring to the Lincoln County War, which happened, of course, in the Billy the Kid story. And when Lew Wallace went there, he named 11 guys that they should arrest. And Billy the Kid was 12th, but most of the guys in front of him were all Texans being driven out of Texas. So that gives you a little inkling of what was going on here.
And I think that we overlook what a large territory this is, that these Texas Cowboys, after the Civil War, maybe they give up droving to Kansas and they find greater opportunity out in the lightly lawed West Texas. And weren't they in the business of rustling cattle? They would raid ranches in West Texas and drive the cattle into New Mexico and Arizona, knowing that there was even less law in the new territories of Arizona and New Mexico?
Yes. As a matter of fact, when you really start to delve into it, the Apaches are in there as well. The Comanches are in there. They were all, the Apaches would go into Mexico and raid and bring back livestock. When Geronimo came back on his third surrender, I think it is, he had like 150 head of cattle that he wanted, that the army took from him and sent back to Mexico. And one of the catalysts of the Cowboy Earp fight that happened in Tombstone is the Cowboys out in the Sulphur Springs Valley and over in the bootheel of New Mexico were raiding into Old Mexico, and with impunity, and they were as bad as the Apaches were to the Mexican government. And finally, a punitive group, probably out of Magdalena or one of the border towns, came up and caught these cowboys, right on the line there. And that's when Old Man Clanton is killed, and several others. And that was just a retaliatory raid because they were so tired of being raided all the time. So yes, you have these raiding parties, cultural, and they're going in all directions, and it's just lawless. So in that arena, we can appreciate what the Earps were trying to do, what the people in Tombstone were trying to do to bring some sort of law and order to that area.
So do you think that the opportunity that the Clantons were trying to go legit on was supplying cattle to the Army and the miners in Cochise County, and so and that they were resentful of the Republican Earps coming into the town, that this was their town and they weren't about to give it up to the Yankees from Kansas?
Well, I do think that was a catalyst, partial catalyst, but when you study it, you really find out that there was just such a fine line between almost everyone involved. And as I said earlier, that just about everybody was doing some sort of illegal thing. And Tombstone becomes this epicenter of the latest mining technology, lots of money from San Francisco and Europe. And we have this idea that Tombstone was this lawless, backwater town where people just drank firewater. And when you study the fact that Clanton spent 10 hours drinking on Allen Street in one of the 66 saloons that were in a town of 10,000 people, and you read the Spicer report, he talks about being in Kelly's wine rooms. And I thought, God, that is a weird name for an Old West establishment. That doesn't sound... So I went to the Hayden Library in Tempe, and I found ads for Kelly's Wine Rooms in Tombstone on the evening of October 25th, 1881. And I thought if I could find an ad from that time, I'd get a sense of what kind of place Ike Clanton was frequenting before the gunfight at the OK Corral. And sure enough, I found Kelly's Wine Rooms, and this is what the ad said: 26 imported wines from Europe, their own local brewery, imported beer from Colorado called Coors, and they favorite drink of the Cowboys is allegedly a gin fizz toddy. It makes you even wonder if they've ever heard of rot gut. Isn't that incredible?
I think that the drunken nature of Old West towns is definitely underplayed in the history of the gunfight. We see, of course, the classic walk down the morning after the night of binge drinking by the Clantons. But I think that that's one of the parts of the legend of the Old West, that these towns were more than just a wooden backdrop that we see from Hollywood. Was the town also at the time of the gunfight electrified, or there telephones? Was there ice cream? How's the town being settled in the backdrop of the gunfight?
Well, a lot of people in Arizona didn't like Tombstone because everything there was brand new. And they felt like it was the antithesis of what people came to Arizona for. Does that sound familiar? That's a common refrain that even here today. And yes, Wyatt Earp ate ice cream on 4th Street. In fact, the Earps and Holiday walked right by the ice cream saloon on their way to the OK Corral. That's just outrageous that an Old West town would have ice cream. And the ice was brought in. They had dry ice that came in on the trains and stuff. And so they had oysters. The Can restaurant was very sophisticated with all sorts of, they weren't eating steak. Let's put it that way. They were eating oysters on the half shell and fish from San Francisco. And this just blows your mind if you're a fan of Westerns like I am, to realize just how modern that town was.
Well, we're going to take a break here and thank our sponsors, Tombstone Monument Ranch, and we're going to come back and talk about travel in the Old West between Tombstone, Lincoln, and El Paso, and how those towns got settled, and if you want to go experience the Old West firsthand, how you can do it.
Thank you, gentlemen cowboys, and we look forward to some of that travel guide material so we can have a Western adventure. My name is Stan Houston, and it's my privilege and my pleasure to be one of the people who helps put this program together. I am the guy who kind of put together what we call the Cowboy Spirit Radio Network. That's right, the Cowboy Spirit Radio Network is designed, and it is for those of you who say, I'd like to do exactly what I hear these guys doing, having so much fun. We want to preserve the cowboy spirit, preserve the Western tradition. In fact, that may be the one thing that'll save Western civilization. So perhaps you have a story to tell. Perhaps you have a program that you'd like to put on the radio. That's what we do. We do what it takes. The What It Takes Radio Company and the Cowboy Spirit Radio Network are here to help you become a cowboy broadcaster, to tell your stories, share your wisdom, insight, and truth, your entertainment, your information, perhaps even some real inspiration. We know how to do that, over 45 years of experience in the broadcast world, around the world, so why don't you reach out to me at stan@witradio.net. Once again, that's stan@witradio.net. And we'll tell you how you can get on the radio. And now back to the program.
We're back here with Bob Boze Bell on Tales of Old Tombstone, and we're talking about outlaws, cowboys, and bushwhackers. And in our final segment today, we want to talk a little bit about how you can go out and experience the Old West yourself and walk where history happened in some of the most important Old West sites between Tombstone, Arizona, Lincoln, New Mexico, and El Paso, Texas. Bob, when was the first time you went to Tombstone, Arizona?
I was there when I was very young. There's a picture of my family. I'm not in the picture, but it's a picture of us on Allen Street, and that must have been about 53. But after I saw the TV show Appointment with Destiny in 1974, I was living in Tucson. I just had never made the trip out there. And I went down there, and I'm telling you, I was hooked, so much so that by the time I had my own family in 1980, and in fact, my wife was 8.5 months pregnant with my daughter, and I drove like a bat out of hell over from Elgin, Arizona, over to Tombstone. And we were in the OK Corral. My wife was weeping. And of course, she was pregnant. She was very sensitive. And I looked over and I said, "What's the matter, honey?" And she said, "How many times have you been here?" I said, "I don't know, 6 times." And she said, "Wouldn't once have been enough?" I said, evidently not, because I just love going to Tombstone and walking those streets. When you're there at night and you walk down that boardwalk on Allen Street, you hear the honky tonk piano playing down there, your skin, you will feel tingly sensation because it is so close to taking you right back to that time. Have you ever had that experience?
I love walking the streets of Tombstone at night. There is something when the moon is out and the stars are bright over Cochise County and Tombstone, and maybe you're one of the last people on the boardwalk. You just stop and you listen for the sounds of the past and those ghosts of the Old West. It's definitely an experience. If you love Old West and Earp Clanton history, you have to go to Tombstone and experience for yourself. And they have lots of festivals throughout the year. Eldorado Days in October is maybe the most famous. And there's local guest ranches to stay at, such as the Tombstone Monument Ranch, where you can actually learn to cowboy and ride into town and tie up your horse and walk over to Big Nose Kate's or the Crystal Palace Saloon and have a cold drink and a meal. And even at Big Nose Kate's, stand at part of the bar that survived the Great Fire of Tombstone. That was downstairs where allegedly the Clantons were drinking the night before, I believe, in the Grand Hotel. So yes, you can walk and stand where history happened in Tombstone, and love to go down there as often as possible.
Well said.
Well, Bob, from Tombstone to Lincoln, I think one of the things you touched on earlier about bushwhackers and cowboys and outlaws is that how violent the Southwest was, and it was on many different levels. Violence between miners on, fighting over claims, the Apache and Comanches, fighting with this horde of settlers like Hell's Angels floating, coming into the Southwest, looking for their bonanzas of gold and silver, the army coming to support the settlements, and then the clashes between settlers trying to control their new empires of commerce and cattle. And I think it's interesting that we rarely talk about Lincoln and Tombstone in the same sentence, but a lot of it is happening at the same time, and they're fighting over the same things. So when did you first go to Lincoln, and how do you try to compare the two? Because I think it's a larger topic that we'll come back to with some other voices on Tales of Old Tombstone.
Yes, in fact, you could really say that if you want a modern euphemism for this phenomenon, it's basically Tombstone was an away game for the same characters that were in the Lincoln County War. And yes, I stumbled through Lincoln with my then girlfriend, Kathy Radina. We were coming back from Austin, Texas, and we went up into the mountains in the Capitans there, and I went through Lincoln. I blasted through there. It was 1978, and I thought I should know this place. And I went home and I looked it up. And I went, oh my goodness! I went right to the town that Billy the Kid was his hometown, and so I made plans immediately to go back. And by 1991, producing my own book on Billy the Kid, which I published in 1992. And I've been a visitor ever since. In fact, I'm going back this July. On July 12th, we're having an art opening at the revitalized Ellis store. The town's been through so many hardships and ups and downs, and we're there to support them. And so we're going to have this big art show there. And all the guys that I love that are into Billy the Kid are going to be there, including Buckeye Blake, Tom Ross, Ball Andrew Hutton, and maybe Stuart Rosebrook.
Well, we'll have to see. I'm hoping that I will be able to make that trip. I really looking forward to walking the streets of Lincoln. It's something I have not done yet, and it's on my bucket list. And so I'm sure hope that I can be there. That would be great fun, and I'd love to really be able to walk the streets with you, Bob, and learn firsthand the legends of and lore of Lincoln, just like I have on our trips to Tombstone. Now, I brought up El Paso in this conversation because there's this triangulation between El Paso on the border and Lincoln and Tombstone and Southwest Texas, and of course Pat Garret. Have you ever traveled to El Paso or down, on the way from Lincoln through Mesilla down to El Paso and on your research?
Oh yeah. I've been through those roads many times. The back way from Tombstone, down to John Slaughter's ranch, and then over along the border there to Deming, south of Deming actually, and into Mesilla and El Paso, and then up the back way to Lincoln, which is Oro Grande, and up through that way. So much history in there. I've actually been in the wash where Pat Garret was ambushed and killed. The only man assassinated while urinating next to a wagon where the defendant claimed self-defense and got off. that's Leon Metz. I didn't make that. Leon Metz, one of the greatest authors. He did a fabulous biography on Pat Garret. He's the one who had that line, and he said it at a conference I was at in Ruidoso in 1991. And in the room, I think we laughed for 5 minutes before we calmed down. That's such a great quote.
Pat Garret was a victim of bushwhacking, the ultimate bushwhacked.
Yep. The ultimate bushwhacked,
which is part of the legend of that era, is that if you go on this outlaw trail in the Southwest and connect the dots, if you're really wanting to travel and see the backcountry, most of these roads are passable. Do you believe that if you're out there on this the outlaw trail of the Earps, the Clantons, Billy the Kid, and the Lincoln County War, do you have to travel a lot of dirt roads, or most of these roads that you followed are paved?
Well, I've been on a few roads that I would not recommend, let's put it that way. But no, most of the roads are very doable. In fact, I was just talking to Bob White, the owner of and guy who renovated Tom Mix's supercharged Cord. And we met yesterday. He wanted to get a light Earp painting, which I had. And he was telling me he's going on a tour. In fact, he's starting in Douglas in the Rex Allen Museum before that. And he's going on the tour that you're just describing. And he said that his number one companion is going to be our Heritage Travel, Ultimate Travel Guide that we put out at True West. And I was so proud of that. And I said, well, please send us pictures as you go on that trail.
Well, it is a big part of our Ultimate Travel Guide at True West Magazine. And I think that when we come back for our next episode, I'd like us to talk about going to Cochise County, staying in Tombstone, and going on the Cowboy Trail, and getting out into the small towns, the ghost towns, the byways and highways of Cochise County, and discovering the where you can go and discover the real history of the Cowboys before their big battle with the Earps behind the OK Corral in 1881. Bob, any last words on this episode of Tales of Old Tombstone?
Well, you got me so dang excited. I'm ready to hit the road, man. I'll see you out there.
All right. Thank you, Bob. And we'll be back next week with the Tales of Old Tombstone and how you can discover where the Cowboys lived and died in the back roads of Cochise County.
And you can also discover where you can have a unique inner cowboy experience. That's right. Everybody wants to be a cowboy at some time in their life. Maybe this is a time to see if perhaps you could bring back some memories, maybe some childhood ambitions, and have just a touch of the life of the men and women, the brave people who actually won the West and settled it and made it a great place to live, work, and take a vacation too. And we're brought to you by people who do just that. Tombstone Monument Ranch, right here in the town too tough to die, still living on with wonderful ways for you to experience, as we said, your inner cowboy. So reach out to them at tombstonemonumentranch.com, tombstonemonumentranch.com. We hope to see you there.
Big iron on his head, big iron, big iron. When he tried to match the ranger with a big iron on his hip, big iron on his head.